Prince Andrew sort of turns to Emily Maitlis and says, that went really well, didn't it? And there's a pause, and Emily looks at him and says, like a walk in the park, which I thought was brilliant. And there's this just kind of tumbleweed silence for a few seconds until Prince Andrew picks up on it and says, oh, yes, park. The park in New York, I get it.
Just tell us, you get a phone call which says, big job for you potentially tomorrow. How did that go?
Well, yeah, they called early evening. I'm sitting watching television, feet up on the sofa. The call comes, are you free tomorrow? And I say, well, what's the job? And they say, we can't tell you. And I say, well, you've got to tell me, because I don't know. I've got a dishwasher coming tomorrow and I'm not sure I'm going to be free. And they say, we can't tell you. We need to know within 1 minute. So here's the number, call us back. And I put the phone down, look at my wife and think,
this is
something intriguing.
Big.
Yeah, it's such an odd thing to say.
So what was going through your head in that 1 minute?
I was thinking it's got to be somebody important. If it's a politician, I may not drag myself up there. But the more I thought about it, the more the panic in their voice suggested that it was something of note. So I just looked at my wife and said, to heck with it. You sort the dishwasher, I'm afraid, out, and I'm going to go and do this job. So I rang them back and said, I'm in. And they said, well, we'll talk to you later. And there was lots of panic and they put the phone down. And I had to wait until later in the evening to find out what was going on.
Right. So when did you actually find out who it was you'd be taking photographs of?
I found myself outside the palace the following morning, having received all my details. I still didn't know why I was there, who I was going to photograph. And I eventually got a text saying, come on in. And I sat in reception, and it was in the reception that a young lady appeared to show me in. And I still have no idea. And we're chatting about all sorts. And eventually we go through the service lift. We end up in the middle of the palace. I'm now standing in just outside the long marble hallway. You're seeing quite a lot of it. And she's talking away, and I just had to interrupt her and say, I'm really sorry, but can you just tell me, why am I here? Who am I here to photograph? Because I haven't been told. And she says, you're here to do the Duke of York. And that's the point where I just had to think, which one's the Duke of York?
I think lots of us would have gone through that thought process, probably, yes. Just a bit of background to this before we get into the details of what actually happened in the interview. How common is it for an external photographer to turn up at the palace?
Well, my understanding is it's not that common, because I have done a few things involving royalty or the royal family, and usually the protocol is there's a royal rota, which is an approved list of photographers. That wasn't mentioned. I think that the palace probably viewed me as being part of the crew. The crew had been signed off, so effectively I didn't go through the usual formalities, I suppose.
Okay. So, but you haven't then been part of the process of preparing for this interview, that sort of painstaking process to try and secure it. So you learn, as we all did when we watched the interview, exactly what happened and some of the extraordinary things that we were going to hear. What was the atmosphere like, well, at least in the beginning when the interview started?
Well, even before the interview started, the atmosphere from Prince Andrew, who arrived slightly early, was very jovial, very positive, very warm. Everybody else was slightly on tenterhooks. I and the crew had been instructed to film come what may. So I picked up, I was the only person who didn't really know what was going to happen. So I wasn't even 100% sure at that stage of the details of the story. So I was just the sort of, I'm in the background slightly to everyone else, and I'm just watching and listening. It was getting tenser the closer we got to Emily Maitlis arriving. But by then we'd already had a quick tour up and down with Prince Andrew showing us the paintings. It was all looking swimmingly. Some food had arrived and we were all ready to go, really. I was briefed and knew what I had to do, and knew that I basically had to get photographs come what may. My job is just to make it happen, but I'm not the most important thing. The film is the thing.
Of course. So you've got to get your job done without sort of interfering on, any of the atmosphere or sort of the dynamic in the room. It sounds like Prince Andrew remained fairly relaxed throughout.
He was incredibly relaxed. In fact, we found ourselves sort of standing in the big room that you can see in the main pictures for quite some time, until eventually I just went up and introduced myself. I just felt a bit odd to be standing with somebody effectively looking through you. So I went up and introduced myself. It was all smiles and fun. And in fact, just before the interview started, I stopped the whole proceedings. I stood up just before they were about to do the hand clap, which matches the sound with the vision, and just pointed out that they'd left the lunch on the table at the back, which would have been in the back of all the, or at least one of the cameras that was filming, an automatic camera, and everyone fell around laughing. So right up to the point of the beginning of the interview, it was pretty positive, really, all around, from what I could pick up.
And maybe that actually sort of, broke the atmosphere a little bit and everyone's feeling jovial. A joke is always good before sort of a big sit-down interview like that. You then watched the interview play out in front of you. I mean, what was it like firsthand realising, they are really onto something pretty big here?
Well, I'm a bit like everyone else at home in that, except that I didn't know what was going to happen next. Like, I think by the time it came out, most people did. It just got more and more dramatic, and all the things that people remember it for, the kind of the Pizza Express, the sweating, all these moments, as they unraveled, I just would occasionally catch the eye of the cameraman on the other side. I'm standing behind one of them, and we would just raise an eyebrow. But at one point, particularly, I think when the Pizzagate moment happened, I actually put my hand over my mouth, and I just thought, that's a headline. That's a headline. There goes, there's another headline. Because you don't hear people of that level in the royal family, in a royal palace, ever talk about such extraordinary things.
Of course. I mean, when you reacted like that, were you nervous that your response might sort of hint to the prince of how this was going to go down?
I just was focused on making sure that he knew who I was and that I could get the photographs. The sort of contrast between the demeanour of Prince Andrew during all of it, right to the very end, and Emily Maitlis, who was taking it very seriously and looking quite shell-shocked almost by the end. I've got some photographs I did immediately after the interview, and the contrast between their expressions is very obvious. She realised, and I don't think he had a clue.
Yeah, so I think Emily's probably thinking at that time, oh my goodness, we've got this footage, we've got the story now, what do we do with it and how do we hold on to it? Whereas I guess she didn't have to be nervous because Prince Andrew thought it had all gone well. I mean, he said as much at the end.
Well, indeed, and in fact, the opening section of the actual interview is them walking down a beautiful marble hallway, which they shot actually at the end and then put it on at the beginning. But when they finished doing that, I again sort of had to intervene because I needed to get that as a still, and asked Prince Andrew and Emily Maitlis whether they walked down the hall again, which they graciously did. But they went at it at such speed, and I'm reversing backwards, 3 cameras around my neck, trying to get the shot, really, trying to make sure that they're not talking because it doesn't look very good for stills, and balance all the light and everything else. So I'm literally running backwards, and all 3 of us end up in a huddle at the end of the marble hallway, which is almost like we sort of run into each other. And at that point, Prince Andrew sort of turns to Emily Maitlis and says, well, that went really well, didn't it? And there's a pause, and Emily looks at him and says, what's like a walk in the park, which I thought was brilliant. And there's this just kind of tumbleweed silence for a few seconds until Prince Andrew picks up on it and says, oh yes, park, the park in New York, I get it. And at that point, I sort of put my cameras down, and for me, that's it. I'm out.
Yeah, and you must be thinking at that point, right, I've also got to get these pictures processed. What happens next?
Well, the producer came up to me. There was bizarrely, they were about to show a movie in that room that they did the interview in. There was a giant screen hidden at the back. All the workers were turning up, putting out chairs. And I said, what's going on? And they said, oh, it's movie night. We show a movie to all the staff. So they were trying to clear us out anyway. But the producer went across and said, look, whispered in my ear, you've just seen a little piece of history. Get yourself out of here. I want these pictures in 2 hours. This is going to be big. And so I just made my escape, as it were, and got a cab to the station. I don't live in London, and made my way back to my office to choose the pictures and try and get it ready in time.
And then those pictures, of course, across newspapers around the world, actually, in the end. Mark, it has been fascinating to hear firsthand what it was like to be in the room. Mark, thank you so much. Mark Harrison, photographer there. Mark actually is part of the series, which is out, well, the film, I should say, not series, out on Netflix this Friday.